In the spring of 1945, in the last days of the Third Reich, the man who had built Hitler's rockets was sitting in a hotel high in the Bavarian Alps, waiting for the war to end.
The last flaming hours for a doomed city. Berlin, once mighty metropolis of a proud nation, now crumbles under the merciless pounding of Russian artillery.
By the beginning of May of that year, the war in Europe was basically over or coming to an end. The Red Army was fighting its way into Berlin from the east. The Americans and the British were driving in from the west. Hitler was dead in his bunker, and the whole German state was coming apart. And up in that hotel was a 33-year-old named Wernher von Braun, who for years had been the technical director of the Nazi rocket program. He was the one who built the V-2. Now, the V-2 was the first weapon of its kind, a rocket that shot up to the edge of space and came down on its target faster than the speed of sound, which meant it hit before you could hear it coming.
Hitler's most terrifying secret weapon, the V-2 rocket, is disclosed. Jet-propelled, the V-2 rises faster and faster until a speed of 50 miles a minute is attained. And no defense against it has been discovered. A weapon that just 1 year earlier might have changed the entire course of the war.
Germany fired thousands of V-2 rockets at London and at Antwerp in the last year of the war. Both the Americans and the Soviets understood that this missile, was the future, not just of weapons, but of spaceflight. Both of them wanted the technology, the crates of blueprints, the V-2 hardware, the engineers who understood how it all worked. Von Braun was betting on something else, that the two sides, the Soviets and the Americans, would treat him personally in completely different ways.
The Soviet Union was the country that had suffered the heaviest losses from the Nazi war machine. Tens of millions of its own people were killed. The Soviets were executing Nazis, not recruiting them. Von Braun had no illusion that they were going to hand the man who helped build those weapons a lab coat and a fresh start, so he didn't take his chances in the East. He sent his brother down the mountain to find an American patrol.
I myself and everybody you see here have decided to go west, and I think our decision was not one of expediency, but a moral decision. We knew that we had created a new means of warfare, and the question as to what nation, to what victorious nation we were willing to entrust this brainchild of ours was a moral decision more than anything else. We wanted to see the world spare another conflict such as Germany had just been through, and we felt that only by surrendering such a weapon to people who are guided by the Bible would such an assurance to the world be best secured.
Von Braun would go on to become a celebrity in the United States, the friendly man in the lab coat who dreamed out loud about traveling to the moon, which at that time still sounded like pure science fiction.
President Kennedy begins a tour of 4 space installations at Huntsville, Alabama, where he is greeted by Dr. Wernher von Braun, space pioneer and director of this research and development center.
I didn't know then that I would become an addict.
An addict?
Yes. To this obsession of mine. Space.
My first guest tonight is the father of the rocket. He was in charge of developing rockets for the Germans before and during the Second World War. This seems so strange. I believe you were forced to join the Nazi Party, as I understand it.
No, this isn't quite right. The situation was such that I just figured, as long as I'm working on rockets here, I really can't afford not to use any help I can get. I needed every bit of help, and to turn this down would have been tantamount to say I give up working in this field, which, as I said a little earlier,
would have meant pretty close to defecting the cause in times of war. Mm-hmm. Which I decided was not the thing to do.
Underneath that public face, von Braun was an officer in the SS. He held the rank of the SS equivalent of a major. He was a Nazi. And the rockets he designed, the ones the Americans wanted so badly, were built by slave labor. Prisoners from concentration camps were marched into tunnels, cut through a mountain, and worked until they died. They died of starvation or exhaustion or untreated disease or a combination.
When you are so used to death that you don't think of it, but you could be dead tomorrow easy. After a couple of days, I am marched to the tunnel, and I am, you don't do anything. You are just like lambs being driven and told, do this, do that. So I'm going into the tunnel. I remember marching along the tunnel, the main tunnel, and my room, which is cut all in stone, is to the left.
The ones caught trying to sabotage the work, the people in those factories who did not want to make these rockets, they were executed. They were, in fact, hanged from a crane in front of the others, sometimes dozens at a time, with the bodies left hanging as a warning to the others.
And then they left them down. About 10 minutes later, I think somebody supervising it, well, they all dead, and me and others are then ordered to take the body and put it in a cart. So I remember if I had their legs, they were still quite warm. I mean, they were not dead yet. And we put them on a cart, and the cart was then taken away to the crematorium, and we were marched back to our workplace. That was our lunch.
In fact, more people died building the V-2 rocket than were ever killed by the V-2 as a weapon. Starting in the autumn of 1944, the Nazis fired more than 3,000 V-2s at London, at Antwerp, and at other Allied cities. And the estimate is they killed around 9,000 people. But building the thing killed far more. An estimated 20,000 prisoners died producing the V-2 in that underground complex, which was called Mittelwerk, fed by a camp called Mittelbau Dora that existed for the single purpose of supplying it with bodies. And Wernher von Braun was not in an office somewhere insulated from that. He was there. He visited the tunnels.
The working conditions there were absolutely horrible. I saw the Mittelwerk several times, once while these prisoners were blasting new tunnels in there, and it was really a pretty hellish environment. I've never been in a mine before, but it was clearly worse in a mine. These inmates, by the way, were mainly resistance fighters from France, Yugoslavia, Poland, predominantly. And there were also German communists among them that the Nazis had reeled and so forth. So it was a pretty international mix of people.
You were accused of...
And when the factory ran short of skilled labor, Wernher von Braun went himself to the Buchenwald concentration camp, walked the rows, and picked out the prisoners he wanted to come and replace those who had died in the complex.
Now, this part of the story of Operation Paperclip is probably the part that most people who've heard of Operation Paperclip know about, at least part of it. The Nazi scientists who came to the United States and built the space program, that's what people have heard about. It gets told as a strange footnote to the story of World War II. But Wernher von Braun is only the most famous face of something much, much larger. The scientists are actually the smallest part of what was really happening.
At the NATO headquarters Fontainebleau, when Lieutenant General Hans Spiedel arrives to take over command of NATO's Central European land forces. From now on, one of the men who led Hitler's blitzkrieg across Europe can give orders to his former enemies.
The United States took in the Third Reich generals and its spy masters and put them in charge of major military operations and organizations and institutions, including NATO. None of this was an anomaly. It gets told as a dark chapter, a deal with the devil, an ugly compromise. A decent country made an ugly compromise, but it did so under pressure. It was, in fact, nothing of the kind. And the program that carried it across, the one that brought the men themselves, that program did have a name, and it was called Operation Paperclip.
You know, in 56, someplace, if you have the file, I changed the name. I changed the name from Paperclip to Defense Scientist Immigration Program.
Why was that?
Huh?
Why did you...
56 to 57, I forgot. I changed the name because the Germans objected to Paperclip. You got that someplace?
Yeah, that's in there. Did that smooth over the problem with the Germans?
I'm Leanne Sima-Fullahan here with Brian Becker, and this is Socialist History, an in-depth, immersive podcast that uncovers the real story of U.S. imperialism through a socialist lens, told from the perspective of the people who fought back. Each episode reopens a hidden chapter of U.S. imperialism and shows how it still shapes the world today. Don't let the empire whitewash its history. Get the socialist history.
That's all for this preview. Subscribe at patreon.com/The Socialist Program to hear the full episode, get access to all our patrons-only content, and help make this show possible.